Good afternoon. We are here for our special business district meeting. If we could, Gary, if you want to just call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Trip Straub, Kathy Anderson, Kami Waldman, Alex Berger, Julie Blackerby, Amr,
Here.
Jeff York. I'm here, David Gibson,
Here.
Mayor McAndrew,
Here.
Myron Burr.
Here.
Okay.
If we could, hopefully everybody had a quick look at the minutes. Could we get a motion?
To approve the minutes is sent.
Can I get a second? All those in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? Great, that passes. And then are we going to hear
We're going to do the FY 26 budget.
first? Okay,
recommendation.
so I'll just follow that rather than
Yeah.
talk to the rep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next item is our budget expense recommendation.
So last time we met, I discussed that we wanted to update our photo and video stock for the special business district for marketing purposes. And that we had at the time had some pending RFPs for those services. Since then, those have come in. I've included those in the packet. We received 2 responses. And you'll see that one is from Studio X and the other one is from Is it, no, that's, one of them sent a lengthy proposal. And the other one is from Regular Guy. I just like to say that. They are within $20 of each other. I think in consultation with Lindsay, our recommendation was Studio X.
Okay.
So as a reminder, this year's budget included $10,000 for marketing purposes. So that would be the category that we would expend these funds this year for.
And what would the photographs would be just be used on the website and just like
On the website, social media, print, email, everything that has a photo on it now, that we communicate through would just have updated photos.
And then, I mean, we're going to redo our website, so I'm assuming the pictures then would be incorporated in the website.
Yeah, we will own the photos that they take, so.
Okay. Will you? Yeah. You're fine.
Do we have releases from the folks that are in the photos, or do we have some way of basically saying entering this space, you release us to use your photos?
I'm not aware of any releases that we had. Most of these are Lindsay has some comments. This might.
Oh, there is, yeah.
And I only ask because it comes up more often now than you would think, where people are like, well, I didn't consent to have my picture taken. And I get the public's thing, and that may be enough, but I just want to be, I think it's a worth question to at least ask before we start putting people's faces on new brochures and websites and everything else.
Yes, generally what I do for special events is anybody that's within the media that is contracted through the city, I give them a media pass or some type of piece that shows that they're working with the city. So, and they generally if they're going into like a restaurant for restaurant week, they will ask in advance. So, I mean, going into a restaurant is a little different than actually being in a public space.
Yeah.
But yes, generally they do ask. And if someone's like, no, then like, okay, we'll just move on. So
I mean, I've seen some places even in Poland where they have like a little sign when you walk in, if it's cordoned off, it just says, hey, by entering this space, you're authorizing yourself to be taken pictures or something. So
yeah,
I just didn't know how far we did that.
Well, if it's the board's pleasure to go with Studio X, then we can have that conversation prior to engaging to make sure we've checked that box.
Yeah, I don't want to make it a big deal. I'm just thinking in this day and age, and people are very touchy about where they are and where they are on social media and where they're on the web, that having, it's the lawyer hat in me, just making sure that we've at least thought about it and done something as easy as possible to at least be able to say, hey, look, we posted a sign or something like that. So
Yes, and I do believe, from what I remember when I was working on the activity guide or city views, however many years ago that was, I do believe there is a blurb in there as well that states any photography or video used.
That may be fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep.
And it'd be easy too, if somebody's picture came out on something, we would just take it down, Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's not hard. I'm just trying to make sure that we
No,
can,
it's-
we can point to something,
Yep.
especially if we're going to start growing that presence with some of this stuff.
So we had a $10,000 budget for this year.
We had a $10,000 place item holder for marketing in this year's current budget. So the $7,000 for Studio X would be that funded
For
for
fiscal
that.
year 26.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe we could have a motion to select Studio X.
Motion to approve Studio X for media
Photography.
things.
Is that a formal way of saying it?
Amber, did you make a second? Did you say second? Oh. No, okay.
Say second.
I say second. Okay, second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
Thank you. So now we're going to be revisiting the FY27 special district budget. I have printed out in front of you the most recent version, and I'll also be putting that up on screen. But before we go into too much of the details, last time we had discussed Placer AI, and there were several questions from this committee about what it does, what's the value of it, how's it work. So I have Regis with the company online now to go for a very brief presentation on this, and then we can go into the rest of the budget after that.
Thanks, Gary. I am working on sharing my screen here. You might have to give me permissions to share
We're on
screen.
that, we're on that process right now.
Okay, great.
You have to accept being promoted.
Okay, great. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As Gary said, I'm Regis Durbin. Work with partners all across the state of Missouri here. I'm here to do just a quick demo, a quick 5-minute demo on what's possible and the solutions that we provide. Our civic partners all across the country can do a quick 5-minute demo, then leave any time for questions that you all have on it. Placer, you can see data in a variety of ways. Essentially, what we do is provide visitation data to any location. So what that means is how many people are coming, where they're coming from, what their demographics look like, and what the visitor journey looks like as well. So where people are coming before and after coming to a certain location. And this could be a park, hotel, vacant retail space. What I'm going to show today is just a business within Clayton, Sushi AI. This will be representative of the types of data that you can see. Again, so for our civic partners, the main core use cases are around event analysis, going out to get grants, sponsoring anything, retail recruitment, workforce analysis, tourism, marketing and promotion. But we'll go ahead and dive into some data here on what's possible to see. So this is our Sushi AI business in Clayton, Missouri. At a high level, we can see the number of unique visitors who have been, so about 17,000 unique visitors over the last 12 months. They've made about close to 23,000 visits. Here's where we can see a trend, and we can see this either daily, weekly, or monthly on the amount of people coming to the business. Here, I believe, is when the business opened back in October 2025. So we can see the spike in traffic and then continued visitation to this business over the course of the last 8 to 9 months. Some other things we can dive into, and again, this is for any location. So we could be looking at a park or a different type of business like a hotel. Time of day, so when people are actually going to a certain location, the day of the week they're visiting, the duration they're staying. We can also get an understanding of where everyone's coming from to get to a certain location as well. So we can zoom out here and heat map and see people coming all across the greater St. Louis area, people come from Kansas City, Chicago, etc. We can also get a sense based on zip code. county, state of the amount of people and see the change year over year. That's great for helping to promote any events that we have within our community to be able to target them geographically, knowing where they're coming from. This visitor journey component is really where we can start to understand how businesses interact with our community. The one thing we were taking a look at a lot is the amount of students that are using Sushi AI. So this is our favorite places. This is the places they also go to, along with going to Sushi AI, and we can filter this based on different categories like dining, hotels, whatever it might be. But what we were looking at before was just education, and so here's where we can see the amount of students from WashU who are using Sushi AI, and I think most of these businesses here or these complexes are part of the WashU campus. Then we also have SLU at the top here that shows about 39% of people of our actual visitors are coming from SLU. We can also dive in and see demographics of anyone who's coming. We have a variety of different demographic data sets like census type data. We also have persona type data here where it actually labels the type of people coming. So just as an example, Power Elite, the wealthiest households in the US, a certain demographic there coming. Again, census type data is where you can.
Hey, Regis, this is
Yep.
Gary. Just to interrupt and make this less futuristic, scary. This is your demographics is based off of their home census tract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and so here's where you can see the median household income and some other demographics too, like age, education, ethnicity, and a lot of our partners leverage and use this to go get grants. Just on the economic development side, you can dive into your workforce. We have self-service reports like this retail leakage report that shows unmet demand based on different retail categories, as well as where your residents are going to fill that demand today in surrounding communities. We also have another tool called a void analysis tool that answers the question, what is the best fit tenant to bring into a vacant retail space? And you could filter this based on different categories as well to get a sense of who would be a good fit, and then actually take this data and go reach out to those businesses to recruit them into your community to drive more sales tax revenue. Additionally, we have transportation data as well, so you can drop a traffic pin at any location and see the amount of people moving through a certain location to help with any infrastructure planning as well, or understand, when people are coming, direction they're coming through, etc. So that's kind of at a very high level. But again, the main core use cases that our partners leverage and use Placer for are to help support park departments with capital allocation planning, economic development for retail recruitment and workforce analysis, travel and tourism, promoting and bringing in more visitors from outside the community to any events that are taking place, as well as transportation to help planning more effectively with any master plans.
Thanks, Regis. Does anybody have any questions? Yep, Kathy.
Yes. So, particularly with the Washington U visitors, there's lots of sites on WashU's campus. It could be the same person going to 3 different sites. How do you know? Is this based on the very last place they were before they went to Sushi AI? Or is this, how do you differentiate? How do you know they're different people and not the same one?
Yeah, so we can see it in a couple different ways. We can see the place they went to directly before coming to Sushi AI, or we could geofence the whole entire campus of WashU and see it that way as well. And that would just show, unique visitors coming to Sushi AI, so there's no duplicative tracking there.
Right, thanks.
Well, I just had a question. I know you use Sushi AI for your example, but can you just click on anything at any time and it would give you all that data?
Correct. Yeah, we can geofence any location, except for locations we consider as sensitive locations, which are military installations, houses of worship like churches, or schools under 18 years old.
So can you also pinpoint days in the past? Like if we wanted to see an event where people were coming from last year, can you look at that?
Correct, yes. So you can see data dating back 7 years, all the way back to 2019. And our data is on about a 3 to 4 day lag. So you get near real-time data over the last 7 years. And you can filter the data based on day or time of day or duration people are actually staying within a certain area.
Yeah.
Regis, do you guys work with, like, uh, I'm trying to think of like people, the real estate people who are trying to like rent out, vacant retail spaces. Like, do you work with them too? Like, do they use Placer AI data to kind of reel people in or when they're out looking for, I mean, you talked about, I guess, your relationship with, cities. Like, do you guys talk to retail professionals too or real estate people?
We do. They're another vertical at Placer. Our civic vertical is our largest vertical, where we have, I think at this point, 2,500 plus cities that leverage and use Placer. But we do have partners in other verticals, like a lot of commercial real estate firms leverage and use Placer, other retailers or national chains as well leverage and use Placer, as well as developers because they love to leverage and use this data just to understand, if we're talking about just retail recruitment, the amount of people moving on a roadway is very helpful for them to understand in terms of, potential development within a community.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just trying to think how it would be beneficial just to commercial real estate people that we've talked to see if would be new information for them or information that they already utilize.
Yeah,
Again,
it's
just in an attempt to get more of our vacant spaces filled up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Some of our communities have found that some of the partners that they work with, even if they do have Placer data, they also prefer if they have it as well, just so they can be talking the same language. But it would be interesting to kind of learn within, the real estate professionals in your area if they're leveraging and using it as well.
And you all may have covered this before the meetings I was at, but like, would we make this available to then downtown businesses to better understand where the people are coming from and not coming from? Or like, I'm trying to think, and it's a question for all of you because this is my first meeting, but I'm just trying to think about like, how could businesses in downtown use this data to be help? Or Regis, maybe what have you seen businesses use it before?
Yeah, you can definitely leverage and use the data to help support local businesses. A lot of our downtown partners leverage and use it to show the time of day people are coming at, when their businesses should actually be open, and then their demographic profile as well to help them better cater their product to the actual consumers who are coming in the downtown area. So all this data you'll be able to leverage and use and produce as research insights to help support, the greater community.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I think, and Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, we did talk about how we could for instance, if Amr was curious where people in Clayton were coming to his restaurant, whether it's like, certain hotels. So maybe he gets a lot of people from the Residence Inn, but not so many from the Hampton Inn. So maybe that would help him like understand that he needs to market better or get somebody over to the Hampton Inn to talk to the manager there or whatever or put some menus there. So, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that
we also
Exactly the
added,
kind of
we
thing
also
I'm
added,
about.
we also added the conversation about, and not, like I could meet individually with Amr about his restaurant, his statistics and all the data there, but it's kind of taking it to the next level too about entertainment or all that other stuff we've been talking about, it's like when people come into Amr's restaurant, where they go afterwards. Because, it's like, I've heard this ever since I've been here, is like, you can come to eat in Clayton and then you have to go somewhere else to do something else. Well, what else are they doing? And, does it fit one of our available spaces currently?
No, and that's kind of what I was asking about. Is I'm just trying to think, thinking through like how it can be useful, um, with kind of that regard and
And I think Regis talked about it in his presentation, but it's also talking about we can look at Clayton as a whole. And, we can segregate the office buildings and see where they go and what they do, but we can also segregate our residents. Not down to I can't find Kami at her house or anything, but, but we can find them by census tract and see, where are they shopping for what? And that may be something that we look at too.
Any other questions for anybody?
This data can be utilized by our businesses. And, the interesting thing to me is, given the demographic of our community, as you break it down by generation, is that a data point also for our businesses to look at? You know, if a particular business wants to be spread between 2 or 3 generations, not 5, is that occurring relative to their operation to help them feel that they're doing better by using the data for activity within their business to match the demand they want? Really cool.
Regis, do you find that municipalities or other cities, do they, and I'm sure you guys want to keep our subscription for years and years, but do you find that if a city gets it for a year, they kind of capture that data for a year and then potentially wait again and then capture it again in 5 years? Or how do you see cities using the data, or is it repeated, I guess, year after year?
Yeah, really two different ways where a partner will leverage and use Placer, test it out, and get some value out of it, but not it really is somewhat dependent on community on the amount of value you get from the data, right? Our partners that see value continue to leverage and use Placer over time because you're getting continuous insights. A lot of the time, right, you're running annual events where you want to get updated numbers, compare them versus the last year. So the data is continuously updated, not only for visitation data, but for demographic, profiles as well. So a lot of the partners that we do have leveraging and use Placer are, consistent customers, or they just don't see the value after really testing it out.
Thanks. Any other questions,
Yeah,
comments?
just Regis, I just want to make sure that I understand. So if I wanted to pick a venue in the city of St. Louis, like an entertainment venue,
Yep.
then I could see that same information, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So another component of Placer too is competitor intelligence, where not only can you see data on Clayton, but you can see data, all across the state of Missouri if you wanted to.
And I like the idea you mentioned too, Gary, about tracking where people go next, right? Because you could go to somebody, to your point too, Bridget, of like, hey, we're seeing that everybody is leaving Clayton after dinner and going to an ice cream shop or going to whatever the next venue is. Then you can actually market it to people. And look, we have all these people who clearly want to go someplace and they don't want to have to drive, like come here. Or it gives us the information and the extra push, if you will, hopefully for some folks who
Yeah.
may otherwise not come here in terms of building and whatever.
Thank you, Regis.
Thanks, Regis. We
Great.
appreciate your time.
Thank you all for letting me join.
Thank you.
Bye.
I guess I should have asked, but so if like we heard that the restaurants in the Grove were leaving or something like that. So we could go there and we could solicit their folks if we wanted to. Right?
Like restaurant owners, or is that what
Yeah.
you mean? I mean, I think we can always do that. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Balkan Treat Box, it was in the Business Journal. They're looking potentially to expand, so why not?
That would be awesome.
I know that would, yeah.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and dig into the rest of this. So at the last meeting, we only had adopted numbers. We didn't have the actuals, and we had a rather loose interpretation of the fund balance. So I have since then worked with the finance department, cleaned up all the numbers with their help. So now we have actually adopted back to FY23, and then the actual expenses that were incurred since 23 also, and then the fund balance that has been audited also. So you can see where we stand there. Last year, it did drop to 0, the fund balance. We do estimate a reserve this year. And then we have, so this updated version that you're seeing now has 2 scenarios on the proposed FY27. The A is the one that we essentially looked at last time. So it has Placer AI in there as a recommendation, and then it has the $49,749 for parking improvements, which we are currently discussing as parking garage signage. So that is essentially the same that we looked at last month. B is a result of Tuesday night where I did the event presentation to the city council. And if you remember, when we discussed events 2 months ago, we decided that this group wanted to not do the Day of the Dead event. And so that presentation was actually supported by the city council last night. So essentially my question is, does this group want to reconsider funding that Day of the Dead event or leave that to the city council to do out of general fund is the basic question. And then I'm also happy to answer any other questions about the budget that you may have.
I mean, I feel like, so at the city council, as Gary just mentioned, I think my understanding when we were at the meeting in May, I think there was a desire by this group to find some extra money, for things to do to benefit the downtown area. The Day of the Dead Festival, wasn't well attended and it's also expensive. At the city council meeting on Tuesday, there was concern. We've always kind of talked about events, really giving them 2 years to take hold. The first year for the Day of the Dead Festival, I can't really remember. I think it kind of happened last minute, so there wasn't a great way to market it. It was something that came together really quickly. This past year, it was marketed better. There was more planning, but the weather was terrible. So I think members of the city council really felt like there wasn't, we didn't really give the festival 2 good years. Also, staff has made improvements. We've kind of learned in the city that really music and food is a great combination to bringing people in. So being able to give the festival 2 good years, because the last couple weren't, again, last minute weather. It was really, and Jeff and Kami can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was kind of the thinking behind actually putting the festival back in. There was no desire to usurp this group's judgment. It was more thinking that I think people in our community want to see more cultural events. So it was really trying to give, and Hispanic Festivals is a willing partner again. They're excited to be a part of it. So I think looking at, hopefully we'll have better weather, and also, some improvements to bring more people in. So there was just this desire by the city council to try the Day of the Dead Festival for 1 more year. So
I think one of the issues that this committee considered when they looked at it last time, part of the presentation was a cost per attendee. And I think maybe it was Tripp or someone else, but I think it may have been Tripp. He's not here to defend himself, unfortunately. Commented on the high cost there, but that really relates to, the mayor is correct. The first event was a scramble to put on by staff, but we did pull it off. Unfortunately, it was just not enough time to market it properly or organize it very well, so that it was what it was. And then the second year we set up in the rain, so it did have a little bit of a hindrance. We have revised the program with Hispanic Festivals Inc. with adding a real stage, more entertainment, more variety, more options there at the event. So we do hope that is a much larger and well-attended event. With that, I'll caveat, it is outside and dependent on the weather. And once we decide we're going to have the event, probably 80 to 90% of the money is already spent. So
in the event of an event like the Day of the Dead, you have it limited to 3 trials, right? You have it twice already. The third trial, if it's a failure, I think you should call it off because it's something that doesn't benefit anything. Second point that I was trying to make, if you have a 50% chance that the weather is going to be bad, why take the risk on it? A lot of events that sometimes we do and it says 50. That 50% scares people off already. People are not going to attend it, even though it's going to be nice at 5 o'clock. In St. Louis, one hour could be storming, the next hours could be beautiful.
Yep.
So I think we should just do a cutoff at 3 o'clock decisions in the weather, whether it's good or bad. And instead of doing the events, and the first time we did the event, the weather was horrible. And did it anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, if your point is not to just clog the street with stuff, that's one issue. If your point is don't spend the money, that decision needs to be made well in advance of 3 o'clock in the day.
Your forecast is forecast. If the forecast says tomorrow there's 80% chance of storm, then the.
But I also, I'll push back just a little bit, Almer, in that we've set up in the rain for Music and Wine and Jazz Festival too, and had some of the biggest nights we've ever had with those. So I
Right.
think it's not really, I mean, potential, tornadoes, the threat of tornadoes is one issue. The rain is another issue. But if you have if the Cubs are coming in town to the Cardinals and it's raining in the morning, but they don't play until 7 o'clock, I don't know how many people are going to back out of it then, you know what I mean? Just to kind of put it in
That's a little
context.
different when you have, ticket holders and they spend the money, they will go there no matter how late. But this is.
Right.
I think that
Well, but I'm just saying that at that point, we've already spent the money within, I don't know. I mean, within months, we've spent a good deal of the money preparing for this event.
The last point I'm gonna make on this one, on this particular event, it's whether the event has a big follower or not. Like we have an experience with the wine festival, that a lot of people like it, and the big, huge turnout. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of people who were disappointed that they didn't hear about it long enough because they didn't plan on it. They're always going to complain, no matter what you do, you don't do enough. But the Day of the Dead, if it doesn't have big followers,
Yeah, well, and that's why we have that partnership. So again, like, I think, as long as there's not like a tornado or whatever, I think we will try the event again. If it, proves to be unsuccessful, then we'll reevaluate again. But I think that's,
Mayor, I think.
yeah,
that-
go ahead, Alex. I'm
I think
sorry.
the data that we've all experienced has to do with the art fair. There are years of the art fair where we thought we had a tornado, or that we had a rainstorm that was like a tornado, or it was beautiful for 3 days. And I don't know how you choose a date and be able to say, everything's going to be okay. I don't, based on our experience at the art fair, it is what it is. And, there will be people who will come, there will be people who will come shorter than they want to come because of the weather. And there'll be people who won't come because of the weather. But if you sold a product, marketed the value, next year will be better. That's the attitude of the art fair.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I mean, you're exactly right. And that was a point I was trying to make, Alex,
Okay.
is that, if you approve this and then the city council approves the final budget that includes this in late September, then October 1, Kristen back there is going to start planning for this event. And so, well, this one's not a good example because of the timing. It's in October.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But let's set that aside. But my point is that she's already going to start contracting and engaging and stuff like that. Now, with that said, just like the art fair, we do watch the weather. The money's already gone, but I mean, if the weather is going to be so inclement, we will send notice that the event is canceled that day if it looks like it's a life.
And I
Issue.
think the communication by the city relative to one of the music events in Shaw Park, which was canceled because of weather, was very effective. Really very effective. So we have a tool in place.
Well, and then I guess too, with respect, or Jeff, did you have a comment before I?
No, good. You finish that. Mine's broader. so-
Well, and I was just gonna say too, because we have a fund balance left over from last year, like, I guess there's money because there's leftover money from this year to fund that and fund the parking improvements and fund the Placer AI, right? I mean, there is, I guess, some wiggle room in the budget this year because of the fund balance we've had.
That's correct. Well, the 49,000 for next year, 50,000 rounded up for next year, is, I think, a good portion of the sign project. I've been working on that since we left the subcommittee meeting the other night, and my educated guess so far is that total project is about $138,000.
So it'll be more than that, more
Yes.
than
So,
50,000.
so,
Yeah.
so the broader point I was going to make, following up to kind of bridge at your point, was like, I think at city council, we were like, we think the event needs to happen another year. We recognize and respect this group's decision last time. That's not something we wanted in the budget. I think we wanted to come back and say, it kind of walking through kind of what our thoughts were from that meeting. If it's something that you guys are willing to have in the budget because it's a downtown event, then great. If you're not, at least for me, I don't want to speak for anybody else, like I can respect that decision, and then we'll just put it in the city's general fund and figure out how to spend it. Because as a council, we want to have it. To me, it's a question of you all and this group is whether or not you're comfortable with it being a event that makes sense for the small, for downtown to have, or whether if you don't, then okay, like it's a money that we're taking recommendations from you all as to how to spend. And if that continues to not be something you want to spend it, then we'll have to figure it out someplace else.
Yeah, along those same lines and what Amr said, I think we can't compare it to the art fair or to the jazz because you already have an audience in the area that is going to attend that. We don't have a Mexican restaurant or any Latin restaurants in the area. So the people that we're trying to get to attend this aren't from around here, which is good, then we do it. So, but on the other hand, obviously the council wants to do it if we do it this year, but I really think we have to recognize that this may not be the kind of event for us. And maybe we're better off having some sort of big children's thing or something. I don't know. But,
I have to agree with you on that.
it doesn't make any sense to me.
I
But
think my biggest thing, which I was not happy with when kind of push the parties in the park aside because of whatever the reason why. I'm not going to say any reasons. And I thought parties in the park was very successful back in the days. And because of all the changes that happened to it rapidly every year, it kind of faded out and people didn't care about it. I think if we want to try this, the Day of the Dead, and it doesn't work out, maybe we can do something in between. Parties in the park and the music, some sort of a venue, every last Wednesday of the month, where it's kind of set up nicely and tastefully and very consistent. And I think her and I have been talking briefly about that a little bit. There's a lot of people in Clayton, the class that likes to come out to the wine festival, to the art fair, to all these events. That's the clients that would like to see parties in the park back on a classy way. Back to different age one. The type of the vending stuff that's out there. I don't know if our clients really care for that. I mean, I see a lot of people walk around in circles and they just leave. Not really into what they see. That's just my opinion. I might be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So
Well, now we can get data on all that, right? Like we can,
that's what I'm pointing.
In theory,
Yeah.
yes.
like we can see like all the demographics at a.
Well, we can do that in theory with Place Right. You could do it with all the events. You could do
Right.
it with music and wine.
That you see on the jazz festival, the music jazz festival is unbelievable. Between the young and the older, people on walkers, pushing their walkers and they want to sit and listen to the music. I mean, that kind of stuff excites me, where you did that, you look at it and go, okay, I never seen these people. Where bicycles and stuff. It's just my opinion.
So I guess the question for you all is whether you want, I guess, to include that event in your budget for this, for you know, one more year, depending on the success of it, or whether you'd rather it be something that the city council figures out how to pay out of our general fund.
Linger, you threw out a number. It was that for the parking,
The
signs?
50,000.
What was it?
It's 49,749 is in there, but it may cost up to 130
Yeah, and-
potentially.
Okay, that's, okay.
And Gary, between options A and B, if the special business district decided they didn't want to fund the Day of the Dead event, then you have that 43,000 that's available
Yeah, that's
in your
correct.
fund balance that you could also apply to parking if you wanted to. You could
Yeah.
almost get
Yeah.
to 100,000 that way.
Yeah, yeah, I think you were asking about number I was referencing.
Right.
So at this, oh, you were there at that. So I've been working on that since then, and the preliminary numbers I'm getting is about 138,000 for all the signs and locations and some of the technical analysis we'll need done with our polls. But I'm still working on that, but that's a fairly rough number. So yeah, that is correct, David. So under scenario A, there would be, in theory, roughly $100,000 for parking projects.
If that's the priority of
Yes.
the board.
But I also think the parking signs are a priority of the board too. So we're
Right.
talking about one pocket on the same pair of, we're talking about two pockets on the same pair of pants, the general fund and the special business district with these two options. So I don't want to speak for the council, but you know, they're looking, I think, to do both. They just want to recognize how this committee wants to fund or not fund either one. That makes sense.
And it's not our business to use like some of this money instead of doing that festival to go out and solicit restaurateurs or stores or anything to move here. That's not our business, right?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I wouldn't, well, I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's currently, again, it's the same pair of pants, but this is funding me too, and Kristen. So I will be the one using Placer. I am the one that contacts businesses now and works with developers. So yes, is the short answer to your question. I mean, but taking another $43,000 and to do that, I don't know for what purpose. There's nothing after we get the Placer AI and, you know, I make contacts with potential, you know, the brokers and the potential businesses. I mean, that's just a tiny marginal cost, if anything.
I don't know if you, I mean, Jeff and Kimmy, I mean, I think you guys are both fairly certain you're both voting members of this. So, I mean, I think it'd be helpful to just hear everyone's thoughts on whether you want to, you know, really make sure that the parking is paid out of this fund versus the event stays here and then we cover whatever parking gap there is left over that can't be taken from here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of, I mean, to Gary's point, it's a little bit of, I mean, if we were sure that we were going to do all of parking and do the event, then it doesn't really matter to me what pocket of money it comes out of, because whatever we can't pay for out of the SBD, we're going to pay for out of general fund. What my pause is we have not, while as a board, I think as a council, the idea of paying for the parking stuff we've talked about. We haven't talked about the actual numbers yet. So my pause is like, do we as a downtown business group, where do we want to put our money? And then the city council, which again, I also sit on, right? So it's a little bit of, I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth here. It's like, what do we though, as a small business, as a downtown business thing, want to pay for? And then putting the city council hat on, then I've got to decide what else do I want to fund after you all have, and again, ultimately we got to review your recommendations and we can make a decision, but I think a lot of us are really trying with the new reincarnation of this board, which I used to sit on the old one years ago, is trying to be very thoughtful and taking your recommendations to heart and trying to do kind of what you guys are recommending if at all possible. So that's a long way of saying, like, from what my takeaway from the city council meeting was that I at least had decided that we were going to do the day of that event out of the general fund because this board didn't particularly want to have it in their budget. So if this board changes its mind, then great, we'll figure out how to tackle whatever the parking winds up being if that's what we want to do. But I want to be clear, I don't think we as a city council can guarantee that all $140,000 of parking is going to get done this year if we have to eat all of that. Like, I don't know, because we haven't talked about it. So that's probably a really long way of saying it. If the three folks that aren't, well, I don't, Kimmy, you may have seven, but like for me, like the three non-city council folks that weren't in that decision decide we don't want the day to dead in our budget, then I can respect that. And then we'll go back and we'll find it in general fund. If you guys are like, look, it's a third year event. Last year was a kind of washout. We want to give it another try because it could drive people into downtown. And that is what we're trying to do. Then by all means, I'll support you all putting it in your budget. And then parking's a bigger thing that we've all talked about for decades that we can figure out a way to tackle that. So does that at least give context to where I'm at, if nothing else?
I think that, I'm sorry, Cammie, I know you.
No, I was just gonna say, I agree with what you said. I do think it would be smart to decide, do we want this, as a council? And then, or do we want to pay for it out here? I think either way, it's probably going to happen because I think, on Tuesday, it was pretty much like, we want to have this again and we'll make it happen however we can. So then I just think again, it's like, do we have the money in this committee for the parking signs? Is that, how, is that the highest priority that this committee decides it to be? Because that's a big chunk and that's probably all of it for the next couple of years. So again, it's just like, we have one big pot, it's just coming from different parts of it. So it's really just from this committee, which priority do you guys want it to be?
Cool. Well, I think we should carry on and make it happen. The expenditures on parking, I don't know if you can cut back on that or whether or not it makes any sense to do that. But the reality is it's an event you're trying to build. And if it's a good event and the council feels like it's a good event, then let's give it another shot. Doesn't mean we have to commit for 10 years. It just simply says, let's see if we can get this done. I think that's reasonable.
I will say that, again, wherever pot of money comes in, I think that's where the city council's at. I think all of us are like, okay, one more year. If it doesn't really take off, then I think we're just
Right.
done. I don't speak for everybody, but I know that's where I was sitting at.
In another year, we'll have a center built where shoe company is, and it'll be a concert hall.
Maybe more than a year, Alex, but
Yeah, probably more like 5 years, but yeah.
Bridget said she would get it done in 6 months.
Right. So I guess Amr and Kathy, like, do you want to put the Day of the Dead budget in here? And then do you have any, because I think we have to make a decision today, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting, yeah, because this rolls into this overall city budget, and I know David and Karen, our finance director, are trying to get that finalized to get to the mayor and the city council. I just want to back up and, I think there was, at the time this discussion was had about this particular event, I think it was fairly unanimous that you didn't want to fund it. And I think there was, I know Trips wasn't able to be here today, but I think he was always under the impression that he would rather pay for material things like the parking, because we are funding a certain amount of events. But I'm just, I just wanted to, because he was had fairly strong position on that. I just wanted to reiterate that. So put
Yeah, I
that in
think that's
context.
Opinion of this, I'm gonna vote against it, and I'll tell you for one reason only. It's not a Clayton event. My opinion.
Okay.
Clayton event should always be as the event that we do and we're very successful at. And type of events here. That's my opinion.
Kathy, do you have any further
No,
thoughts?
I agree with Amr. I'll abstain. I don't, everybody wants to have it, then that's fine, but I totally agree with Amber. I just don't, I think we could find other events that would be,
Well, and I think,
but we'll try it.
yeah, no, I mean, but I think it's ultimately just a decision of deciding whether or not, I think it sounds like, and I think Gary, I appreciate, well, I think it's going to happen regardless, but I think the point is, we will fund it out of the general fund. And so the funding that's here will be focused more on getting some of those parking signs up, which I think was a focus and I think more of a desire from this group. Would you guys?
I mean, I can't speak to desire. It's my first meeting, but
Yeah, yeah.
but I would say, as I said earlier, like I want to be able to, unlike maybe what we did before and some of these, like if you all don't feel that it's an event that you want to spend this money for, I, as a council person, can respect that decision, and we will find another places to pay for it and leave the money here. If it's something you really want to do, I can also take that and respect that and try to figure out a way to make that work. But that's why we created this board, and that's why we wanted you guys here to give us feedback on some of the stuff we're doing specifically for downtown, for money that's being collected from downtown folks to be spent for downtown. So
Cool.
Then I'm
So-
gonna vote against it.
Okay, so well, it would ultimately be voting, I think. So if you look at the screen, option A does not include that particular festival.
I think the motion may be, Kathy, if you wanted to make one that you wanted, well, I don't know if there's any, I don't know if there's any other questions. But I think the motion would be to recommend to the city council option A for the special business district budget.
Are there any other further or Alex, you look like you might have a question or?
I'm okay.
Just to be clear too, if SPD wants to allocate that 43,445, that should be included in the motion too, which would be proposal A plus usage of the fund balance for the parking improvements.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks, David.
You want to say so moved, maybe?
Yeah,
Kathy?
yeah, so moved.
Yeah. Can I have a second?
Second.
If, okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Hey, thank you.
Good.
We had a infrastructure and parking subcommittee meeting this week. There was several of you that attended that meeting. Someone other than me would like to give the update.
I apologize. I've got to head out and get somewhere by 2:30, so I will catch up. Kami, I'll catch up with you on that infrastructure. Sorry to leave early.
No, that's fine.
I mean, I was at the meeting, were you talking about the meeting 2 days ago, right? Yeah. I think a big component of that meeting is Mike Shadle, is working with Gary, and Amr, was at this meeting, and Kami was as well, to develop really, a very, specific program whereby, restaurants, especially potentially retailers, part-time retailers, they're working out the details where there would be discounted parking available to employees who are working in Clayton, again, for primarily restaurant employees to get their cars off the street. Because right now they're parking in front of Oceano, they're parking in front of Ivy, and then they run out every couple hours and plug the meter. But we're just trying to alleviate some of the parking strain on our streets. So that way, hopefully, the idea would maybe Amr would buy 10 cars from Mike Shadle, who he's in charge of he's chair of our economic development committee, but he's also in charge of the Triangle parking garage, which is over there, the Novelli garage. Yeah. So they're still working out the details, but we talked a lot more about that program. But Amr would potentially buy 10 of these cards at a discounted price, pass them out to his employees as he would decide, really the owner of, or, the primary person at the restaurant or the shop would own the cards to work with the particular parking person. The idea is to find multiple garages rather than just like Novelli's garage, because potentially the people at Pastaria, or that's a bad example, but restaurants further away, like at Sushi AI, they may not want to walk that far. So potentially finding garages that are closer to whichever restaurant we're trying to target.
Yeah, I mean, the current iteration of the program that the mayor is outlining, there are 4 garages involved. So the Novelli garage, the city-owned garage behind Clayton on the Park. I'm also having discussions with Pierre Leclerc next door here, and then the plaza on Carondelet too. So the program is very conscious of being in the Midwest and distances for walking. So we are trying to spread the wealth. It is also a pilot program, so we could also incur more garages as it works, but we're trying to create a program that's successful to begin with.
Great.
And then we also spend a good amount of time talking about the parking signs. So these are illuminated signs in a highly visible area with all the garages that have public parking. Because we've got 2 or 3 different kinds of signs out there. There's some private signs. We have the old standard DOT approved blue and white sign on the garage itself. We have old wayfinding signs up, but nothing standing out. So this one is actually illuminated, probably on light poles, and should be highly visible. So that's the money we've been talking about today.
So St. Joe's parking lots. Does the city rent those out now? I mean,
No, that was an old contract where we did manage those, the one on Merrimack.
yeah.
Yeah, no, we haven't managed those probably for 5 years now. Yeah,
So does anybody manage it or?
they do it through a private contractor. You can lease spaces up there.
Because, and the lower one that's right behind the church, that's,
That's the city.
I mean, but that doesn't have cars in there a lot. I mean, well, the construction people park there and all, but unless there's a funeral or something, it's pretty,
One with the meters or the other
yeah,
one?
the one with the meter.
Meters,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and we try to find places where, like garages or places where people like reserve spots versus like meters or.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to find like Mike's garage, Mike Shadle's garage or the Novelli garage is almost 2,500 spaces, 2,600 spaces.
Wow.
And so there are a lot of empty spaces, and putting more cars there doesn't impact that. Where if we put a bunch of cars on that
Right.
lot you're talking about, then yeah, you couldn't go to Sushi AI or wherever it is you're going over there.
Oh, I had no idea.
But we are already leasing the back row of that for permits. So, I think St. Louis Suit Company has a spot in there too, and Mona at the Diamond Shop has a couple spaces. So a lot of that's going on already. But since perception is reality when it comes to parking, having an open lot is sometimes a good thing.
Cool.
So, and I want to say congratulations for the Park Mobile. I cannot tell you how happy with that. I mean, they
Yeah,
get out
I
of
think
the
it's
car
nice
and
to have, yeah,
walk
nice to have
along.
choices, so.
Yeah.
We'd like to do a testimonial video with you, Kathy.
Welcome to it. Welcome to it.
I call a lot.
All right, I think go ahead, Amber.
Can I
do you
bring
have-
something off the subject a little bit?
Sure.
Talking about parking and traffic, and maybe this is for another meeting, because it's gonna. Might want to think about have accessible on the line.
What do you mean?
The crosswalks.
Wheelchair comes on the lights. Light changes a lot faster than they can cross. We having a little issue. This came up the other day.
Like people crossing the street and there's not enough time to get.
Push the button on Maryland Avenue and you want to cross the street all the way. Now a wheelchair guy pushes his wheelchair across, he's already past the zero and the car is just turning. Comments that I heard, when I hear a lot of things from people.
Yeah.
Clayton can put a bike lane, but they can't figure out how to get access to the wheelchair guy crossing the street. Thought about it, and there's a lot of ways to do this, I think. Council meetings sometimes, put a button, a handicap button on the lights, a yellow lane on the ground for the handicap, or That'll give me maybe another 30-second on the light flash.
Is that a thing? Like, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, we can change the timing of the light.
Just, we'll talk to Public Works and see what our initial timing is, but our timing,
It takes 4 people to cross the line in Maryland before it's over.
yeah, so our timing meets all the ADA requirements. We have engineers that actually time all that out for us. And the lane markings are all ADA compliant, as well as the button height and everything else. But we can take a look at the timing and see.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard that. I mean, I don't know nothing about.
Yeah, we'll verify that everything is running the way it should be. But there should be enough time. It should be designed that way.
You gotta figure a lot of the people
It's 10
in the
seconds.
wheelchairs might be old.
It's a 10-second light. I mean,
Gotta be more than 10.
No, I think it's longer than
it
that.
goes from 10 down to 0.
Does it?
Yeah.
Gotta be higher than 10. It's gotta be higher than.
Once it starts counting down.
Oh, the,
Goes flash and then start counting.
But I think it starts at like 20 or something.
oh, but the walk sign's on for a while before it.
You'll have to
hits-
walk for a while and then a
and the
countdown.
10 goes on.
When it starts flashing at 10, that means it's running out of time, but it started like at 20 or 24 seconds.
I did not walk through it.
Yeah, I know.
But this is what I'm just.
No, but that's good. I mean, it's great to get the feedback.
Oh, it's good feedback. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll check with Public Works and look at the time.
Cool. Thank you.
Now I'm gonna start counting how long it takes.
Well, you know, you have to pay attention to a lot of these details when you hear
Yeah.
people talking.
For sure.
I mean, it made me want to get out of the restaurant and go start walking across the street to see
Exactly.
how fast I can do it.
No, I mean, I used to like the walk sign that goes across Brentwood from like Clayton on the park to the pool, just because like for years I had little people that I was trying to drag across the street and you really had to move because that like wasn't very long.
Some
that
of
long.
the streets, I call them the fast lane. It's one of the things that everybody thinks I'm crazy when I said I was voting for the bike lane, not because I want the bikers to come through, because I wanted to slow the traffic on
Right.
Maryland.
Yeah.
People fly on that street like it's a highway.
Yeah, especially down that hill,
Down that
right,
hill with
right in front
lights
of your
on.
restaurant, yeah.
Some people try to beat that light. If it's turning yellow, they want to come across it. And it's like, there's kids, there's bicycles, there's older people, there's all kind of stuff in that. So slowing down that road was a favorite.
All right, well, good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Back to work.